Oh, I better
Good
start my
morning.
video.
Okay.
My name is Christopher Iannella. I will chair the meeting today. I'd like to introduce the nominee, Mr. Paul Fullam. How are you, sir?
Well, thank you, Councillor.
At this point, I'd like to read a letter dated April 7th, 2021, addressed to the Executive Council. Dear Councilors, I am pleased to nominate Paul Fullam to the position of Clerk Magistrate of the Hingham District Court. I submit this nomination for the advice and consent of the Executive Council pursuant to Part 2, Chapter 2 of the Constitution of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Sincerely, Charles Baker, Governor. At this point, I know, Mr. Fullam, you have some distinguished guests and people who want to speak on your behalf. Before we introduce your family, at this point, I know you have some witnesses. The Honorable Daniel DiLorati, Associate Justice of the District Court. I believe he's on Zoom. So at this point, if we could hear from Judge DiLorati. Good to see you, Judge.
Yeah, good morning, Councillor Iannella and members of the council. It's been 4 years since I've been before you. It seems like 4 days ago. And Councillor Iannella, I remember one of your parting words to me when I was leaving was, Judge DiLorati, you'll be a good judge if you just can refrain from crying the whole time that you're sitting on the bench. I think the whole time I had my governor's council hearing, I think most of it I was crying, mostly out of, I guess, love and affection for the people who have been good to me. And one of the reasons I'm here today is to speak for Paul, because Paul is a dear friend and a dear colleague. I've known him for many, many years. And I'm honored that Paul asked me to say a few words on his behalf. So just briefly, I've known Paul professionally for over 20 years. Back in I think around 2000, I ran into Paul. I was doing court-appointed work out of Dorchester. Paul at that time was a probation officer, and I think he and I interacted frequently then as a probation officer over maybe 5 or 6 years. And then he became an assistant clerk probably for 5 or 6 more years. So for about 13 years, I interacted with Paul probably 3 or 4 times a week. I was either on the phone with him or meeting with him personally. Later he moved to Hingham. I didn't see him as much then, but I still, would do the occasional OUI case down there, and I would run into Paul. And later, when I became a judge in 2017, Paul actually was my sessions clerk when I sat there, and I'm involved with the drug court here in Brockton, and I participated in the Hingham Drug Court, and Paul was my clerk there. So I know Paul for a long time professionally, and obviously over the years, he and I have become great friends. And I can tell you from experience, just one of the most important things we all want to know is about people is what kind of person they are. And Paul's a gentleman in every way. He treats everybody with respect. He treats everybody with courtesy, professionalism, patience. And as you know, in the clerk magistrate's jobs, they're on the front line and they're meeting with the public every day. And Paul is a beautiful example. If they say first impressions make the best impression, then Paul, or lasting impression, Paul, in that regard is a champion. He's just a great guy all the way around. Obviously, he's very knowledgeable about the court system. He's been in it for 20 years. And, as they say, he's kind of a turnkey guy. I mean, he's a great appointment, and I'm hoping that he'll get the votes today that he needs. I'm sure he will, but he's a turnkey guy, meaning he can go right in and do this job. And the reason he can do that, he's been doing it for 20 years. And as you know, the last 2 years down in Hingham, he's been an acting clerk magistrate. So he's a guy who doesn't need any experience or any kind of workup to start the job. He's already been in the job, and he's ready to go on day one. The other thing that I know, I guess I knew as a lawyer, and now I know it as a judge, is The clerk magistrate, it needs to be a good manager. And Paul is, beloved. I can say that by everybody down in Hingham. Everyone was so ecstatic that he was nominated. Paul treats everybody with honesty and fairness. And the thing I like about him, he's the first one to jump into the session if things are getting backed up. He'll do anything that's required to get the job done. He won't ask anybody to do anything he won't do. And again, because he's done it for 20 years, he can do it gracefully. So, Paul, in that regard, great manager, well-respected. People really are really happy for him. He's earned it. He's a hardworking guy. And, no one works harder or is more prepared than Paul. Always was prepared. Love to be with him, work with him. Always ready to go at 9 o'clock and very good at what he does. So obviously over the 20 years, Paul and I become friends. I said that at the beginning, and I consider him a dear friend. He's a great family guy. He's a very modest man. He's temperate in his demeanor and his disposition. He has tons of common sense, which we all are looking for in any government agency. You need to have some common sense. These cases are coming at you quick and fast. You need to be able to think in your feet, and Paul can do all those things. So, I could go on and on about Paul, but in short, I think he's absolutely the perfect candidate, certainly to be a clerk, and he's absolutely the perfect candidate for the Hingham magistrate's job. I think it's a tremendous appointment, and I enthusiastically support Paul. I hope you do the same. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Do any of the councilors, Councillor Juvenville?
Judge, it's good to see you again. We've missed you. We'd like you back at the council now and then.
Okay, well, if I get invited, Councilor Juvenville, I come, but I haven't been invited in 4 years. So, you can pick up the phone call occasionally and call me. I'll come up.
We'll put that on the list and make a note of that, Mr. Chairman.
Thank
But,
you.
you're doing a great job as a judge, and everybody speaks so highly of you, and I'm glad you came in for this nominee because I agree with everything you've said.
Thank you
Yeah,
very
I
much.
appreciate it.
Councilor Marilyn Petito.
Devaney, thank you. Nice to see you, Judge. I could be corrected, but I think this is the first time you've come to speak for a nominee.
It is, Councilor Devaney.
So
How are you?
that's quite a tribute to the nominee. And, your testimony, demonstrates how much you know of him and how much you respect him. And your testimony means a lot to us. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much.
It's my pleasure. And Councilor Devaney, I look forward to another breakfast.
Okay, thank you. Good to see you, Judge. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
At this point, we'll hear from the clerk of the Brighton District Court, Eric Donovan.
Great clerk. Brighton District Court.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning, Councilor Iannella and councilors. Thank you for having me.
And if you want, you can take your mask off while you speak.
Thank you, sir.
That's your choice, prerogative.
So I want to thank the Governor's Councils for allowing me to speak today on behalf of my great friend, Paul Fullam. And I also want to thank Paul for bestowing me the honor to speak on his behalf. As you may recall, I was fortunate enough to be in his position here before you 3 years ago, after I'd been nominated for a similar position or the same position in the Brighton Division of the Boston Municipal Court. And this esteemed body was kind enough to confirm my nomination. And I'm hopeful that you will do the same for my friend Paul. I have known Paul for 45 years. We went to grammar school together. We played sports together. We were in and out of each other's homes as children. We were in each other's weddings. Our families have vacationed together. I say this simply because I know Paul intimately, very well. I also know the role of the clerk magistrate's position. As a clerk magistrate, as you're all aware, during this pandemic, the SJC has consistently said that our offices shall remain open because we're the public face of the court system. And I can think of no better representative of the court system than Paul Fullam. When people come to the courts, it's generally not for good reasons, with few exceptions. Most of the people utilizing our courts are not attorneys. They're people in crisis. The person that you want to see when you're having a bad day is Paul Fullam. Honest, he's intelligent, he's fair, he's kind, he's compassionate, empathetic. I know this role intimately, as I know Paul intimately. I'd just like to give a little more background about Paul, who I also know professionally. After graduating from Norwich University, Paul started his career as a corrections officer in the Suffolk County Sheriff's Department. And always looking to better himself, with his hard work and determination, he went to school full-time at nights at Boston University and earned his master's degree in criminal justice. And after that, he became a probation officer. And then he became an assistant clerk in the Boston Municipal Court, Dorchester Division. At that time, I was an assistant clerk in Brockton, and I was hearing from different attorneys about this great assistant clerk that was in the Boston Municipal Court, and no surprise to me, it was Paul Fullam. And then Paul later became an assistant clerk in the district court in Hingham. As I said, I was in Brockton. We were now in the same region. So we'd often work with the same judges, same attorneys, and once again, I was hearing about Paul. And again, it didn't surprise me at all. And so when Chief Dolly nominated him or appointed him as the acting clerk, it didn't surprise me then either. Been doing the job. As Justice DeLaurati just said a few moments ago, and I'd like to echo, Paul's a tremendous candidate, and he is the perfect candidate for this position. He knows the job. He knows the role of the clerk magistrate, and he also knows how to treat people. Treats them fairly, treats them impartially, and he treats them with compassion. So as I said at the outset, I'm very hopeful that great body will confirm my great friend, Paul Fullam. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you very much. Any questions of Clerk Donovan, Councillor Devaney?
Thank you for coming in. It's nice to see you.
Nice to see you again,
Right.
Councilor.
One of my good votes.
Thank you.
You know, I've said this before, and I want you to know how much your testimony is so valuable to us. Two great witnesses, and I've said it before, and we've had people sitting in your seat, and I've asked, well, how do you know this? You know, how do you know the nominee? And once in court, you know, that doesn't make it with me. And, you know, your testimony is sincere. You know him, you respect him, and we all respect what you do. Thank you for your work, and I appreciate that. Now, if you could use one adjective, what would you say about this nominee? What attribute is he bringing to the bench?
I only could pick one attribute, Councilor, to be outstanding, because there's so many other adjectives I can use to describe him. He's fair, he's impartial, he's generous, he's kind, he's hardworking, he's diligent.
That's more than the adjectives, right? Well, thank you very much for coming in. It means a lot.
Thank you, Council. It's nice to see you.
Thank you very much. I don't have any questions. It's great to see you. From the folks that I talked to in the Brighton area, it appears that you're doing an outstanding job. You treat everybody fairly, and that's all you can ask of anybody. Again, good to see you, and you're a great supporter of Mr. Fullam, and I'm sure we'll see you again. Thank you very much.
Thank you very
Mr.
much.
Chairman,
I'm sorry. I apologize.
very
Councilor
briefly.
Giordano.
I agree with everything the chairman said about the witness. Tell us, when are you're back in the Brighton building?
Yes, Councilor.
And when did you go back there?
It was the beginning of February.
And it's all done overnight, it's beautiful.
Beautiful. They did a tremendous job.
Are they having any like open house or anything over there?
I spoke to the first justice about that, and we're still, because of COVID, we were hoping to do initially something on Law Day. But it doesn't appear we're going to do that this year. We're hopeful in the fall though, that we're going to do something.
You can wear masks and go over.
I'll bring that to the first justice's
Yeah.
attention. I think it's a
You're
great
doing-
idea.
You're doing a great job, and you know,
Thank you, Council.
I really want to thank you for what you do for the people that come before you at those clerks hearings, because you're just wonderful with it.
Thank you.
and it means a lot to people's future, and you know that.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good to
Thank
see
you
you.
very much. Nice to see you all. Thank you.
At this point, that exhausts the folks who will speak on Mr. Fulham's behalf. Is there anyone here who would like to speak in opposition to the nomination of Mr. Fulham? There being no one in opposition at this point, you have the floor. And if you could give us a brief presentation as to why you think you should be a clerk magistrate of the Hingham District Court.
Certainly.
Close
Thank
mic,
you,
close.
Council.
Excuse me.
Good morning, members of the council. My name is Paul Fullam, and I am the nominee for the position of Clerk Magistrate of the Hingham District Court. I am both honored and humbled to be here before you this morning. I would like to thank Governor Baker and Lieutenant Governor Polito for their confidence in nominating me for this position. I would also like to thank Chief Legal Counsel Bob Ross, Executive Director Lauren Petrino Green, Attorney Emily Gauthier, and Valerie McCarthy for all of their help throughout this process. I want to thank you, Councillor Iannella, and all of the councilors for taking time out of your busy schedules to meet and speak with me over the last couple of weeks. I enjoyed each conversation and appreciate your genuine interest in getting to know me. I thank Chief Justice Dolly for appointing me as the acting clerk magistrate and giving me the opportunity to demonstrate my abilities during the height of the COVID pandemic. Finally, I would like to express my gratitude to my family, friends, colleagues, including the judges, clerk's office staff, and other court personnel, and to all who have supported me throughout the application process. I believe that each counselor has been provided with my application and resume and is aware of my professional and educational backgrounds. I would now like to take the opportunity to tell you a bit about my personal background. I grew up in a middle-class family in Dorchester with my parents, Sheila and Robert Fulham, and my 4 brothers, Bob, Rich, Dan, and Ted. I was born the 4th of 5 boys. We lived on the first floor of a 2-family home purchased by my parents. At an early age, I watched as my father worked 2 full-time and 2 part-time jobs at the same time to make ends meet, in addition to trying to catch a hockey, football, or baseball game in which one of us was playing. To this day, I have never met anybody who worked harder to provide his family with the things that he never had during his childhood. I know that it sounds cliche, but he was also a man that would give a stranger in need the shirt off his back. During this time, my mother was challenged with raising 5 boys essentially as a single parent. My mother is the most kind, patient, and forgiving person that I know. The loving atmosphere that was fostered by my parents at home allowed us to learn the value of family and grow as individuals. Although we were not wealthy, through my parents' dedication to family, we were able to attend private schools, play sports, and enjoy summer vacations together. My parents taught me to be honest, polite, kind, respectful, non-judgmental, patient, empathetic, to work hard, to treat others the way you want to be treated, and to never forget where you came from. In 1998, I was lucky enough to marry my best friend, my wife, Susan. She was brought up with similar values, and these are the same values that we try to instill in our 3 sons, Brendan, Michael, and Liam. I also implement these values on a daily basis in the performance of my duties as the acting clerk magistrate. I want to be the clerk magistrate in Hingham District Court because I want to continue to serve the public and be the example for other courthouse employees. I will remain vigilant in all duties as a clerk and continue to treat all who come through the courthouse doors with dignity and respect. I believe that the clerk is the face of the court for most and sets the tone for the entire courthouse experience for attorneys, litigants, and all court users. I ask that you confirm my appointment. I believe that these values, combined with my education and professional tenure as a correction officer, probation officer, assistant clerk magistrate, and acting clerk magistrate over the past 30 years, make me the best candidate for the position of clerk magistrate in the Hingham District Court. Thank you once again for your time, and I look forward to your comments and any further questions that you may have for me.
Thank you very much. I know you have some special folks here today.
I do.
And if you'd like to introduce your family, that'd be great.
Sure. Starting far right is my son Liam. Liam is in the 8th grade at Furnace Brook Middle School in Marshfield. Liam's right is my mother, Sheila Fullam. To my mother's right is my wife, Susan. And to her right is my son, Michael, who is a freshman at UMass Boston. My son, Brendan, was not able to make it today because he's at the Massachusetts Maritime Academy and had a physics exam and another exam.
Thank you.
Otherwise, he would be here as well. Thank you.
At this point, we're going to hear from Councillor Terry Kennedy.
Good morning, Paul. I apologize, I'm not in there in person. I don't have any questions for you. I have seen you in action as the acting clerk, as an assistant clerk, and in your many roles over the years. And I think you've been doing the job. You've been doing a fantastic job at it. I appear, as you know, in the Hingham District Court relatively frequently. And I think that you're doing a great job down there. Your family should be very, very proud of you. And this is probably, given what you're going through, it's probably the only time your son taking a physics exam is having an easier time. But I look forward to voting for you next week, and thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilor Kennedy.
Next, we'll hear from Councillor Joseph Ferreira. He's having, we will get back to him next. At this point, we'll hear from Councillor Mary Hurley.
Thank you. Good morning. We spoke briefly last week. Your resume is incredibly impressive in that you did it the good old-fashioned way. You earned it first as a probation officer, then as an assistant clerk, and every day you've walked the walk and talked the talk of doing an excellent job. And I'm from the Golden West. Normally, I have to seek out some of my former colleagues on the district court to check out nominees for either judgeships or clerkships. In this case, I had people reaching out to me, including Judge Sidney Hanlon that I've known for close to 30 years. And if she could nominate someone for sainthood, it would be you. So I really don't have any questions. We talked about bail issues, which are important to me. You have the right attitude on that. And I think you're going to do a great job. So Councillor Kennedy and Councillor Iannella both spoke very highly of you. And I intend to vote for you next week. So thank you very much. And I wish you the best of luck in your new career. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Hurley.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hurley. At this point, we'll hear from Councillor Paul DiPaolo.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, Mr. Fullam. How are you?
Good morning. I'm well, thank you.
It's a pleasure to see you in person. I appreciate your time speaking with me ahead of this hearing.
Likewise.
And the folks who've spoken on your behalf, both this morning and outside this hearing, have had tremendous things to say about you. So I'm really happy to have you here. So I did want to ask a couple of questions, though, and they're things we had spoken about. The first is we had occasion to talk about the way you can use your discretion in your role, especially around folks who are coming in and you, for lack of a better phrase, the idea of a second chance and the idea of alternatives sometimes to issuing a complaint for folks who come in. So I wonder if you could, and you also mentioned that in your application. So I wonder if you could talk about how you see that discretion, the kinds of considerations you take into account making those decisions.
Sure. So what we discussed was that oftentimes when there's a clerk's hearing and it's a minor offense, in most cases, the individual, the alleged, doesn't have a record, the clerk can use his discretion and in a number of ways come up with an alternative disposition. One of the examples I gave to you, I think, was for leaving the scene of property damage. There may be a restitution figure that the alleged is willing to pay that satisfies both the Commonwealth and the alleged victim. It preserves the individual's record, and it prevents them from having the stigma of a criminal record, which naturally could affect them down the line, for housing or student loans, things of that nature.
And how would you balance that when someone comes before you who does have a record for some minor offense that potentially, if they were to come before someone with your philosophy, they wouldn't have?
So actually, very recently, I had a gentleman that came before us, and he had a minor criminal record, but hadn't been in trouble for some time. He had stolen a TV out of a hotel in which he was working. And in speaking to the police prosecutor, I asked him if there would be anything that would satisfy the Commonwealth in lieu of issuing the complaint based on the fact that he hadn't had a criminal record in a long time, and it was only minor violations prior to that. They did agree with that, and the gentleman was given the opportunity to pay the restitution for the television because he couldn't recover the actual television, and basically averted having that criminal charge issued against him.
And I feel like that pragmatism is what we need in our system. So I appreciate that. And, going as far back to being a corrections officer to your role today, the role that mental health plays in our system and the challenges people face and the challenges that we face in how to address it in the best way for society to keep people on a good path and to also keep our communities safe. What do you see as some of the biggest challenges around mental health as they're coming through the courts right now? And what do you think can be done to address them?
I think a lot of time it may be undiagnosed, and we can't make assumptions. I think that oftentimes that substance use disorders and alcohol use disorders are people self-medicating. So I think in order to get to the root of the issue, we have to address those issues first. Through our court, we use the court clinic. So we would refer them if we think there's an issue there. Or oftentimes it's not until they're placed on probation that sometimes those issues are brought into light. But at the clerk's level, if we're aware of it, we would try to see if they want to talk to somebody in the court clinic.
And utilize those diversion options.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And then finally, we talked briefly about, the so-called Harvard study that the late Justice Gantz commissioned. And I just wanted to know if you could talk about your reaction to that, your familiarity with it, and just your reaction to what it had to say.
As we talked, the statistics show that there's a disparity in the sentencing of blacks and Latinos versus whites. And the question was to do with the implicit bias. I could tell you over my 20 plus years, I haven't witnessed it. I do think that it would certainly require further research. And if in fact they find that that is the root of the problem, then it should be corrected.
Yeah, and that report it didn't claim that implicit bias was necessarily the cause. They couldn't link that causation.
Right.
What do you think what do you think the causes could be?
I really don't know. Honestly, I think I explained to you when somebody comes before me.
Yeah.
I don't take any of that into consideration. I take into consideration the path that got them to me, and basically why they're there and some of the variables that got them there. I think that's how I would sit and probably I guess, determine what type of decision I'm going to make.
Yeah, and obviously we need that commitment to fairness and impartiality, so I appreciate that as well. And again, I congratulate you for being here. I'm glad you're able to share this day with your family and, wish you the best of luck for the rest of the hearing.
Thank you, Councilor DiPaolo.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councilor DiPaolo. Next, we'll hear from Councilor Joseph Ferrara.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it. I'm sorry I'm not there in person, but I did have the opportunity to speak with you. I appreciate our conversation. I've been to the Hingham District Court once in my life. I'm not a regular, but I do heavily rely on Councilor Jubenville and Councilor Kennedy, who go there routinely, who tell me what a great person you are. And as a former police officer myself, I appreciate your public service. I think you're going to make a great clerk, and you certainly have my support next week.
Thank you, Councilor Ferrara.
Thank you, Councilor. Next, we'll hear from Councilor Robert Jubenville.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, just to follow up on Councilor DiPaolo's questioning about clerk's hearings, you might recall, I think it was 2 years ago, a Globe article about the secret courts in our Commonwealth.
I do.
And I was struck by the fact in that article that there were, and I'm going from my memory, so I may be off one or two, that there was about 8 people that had made complaints throughout the state of one version or another about having been in a clerk's hearing. I believe there was almost 100,000 clerk's hearings held that year. So 8 out of 100,000 complaining, pretty good batting average in my view. But I know you've never heard of any secret courts, and I certainly haven't, 40-something years of practicing law. And I don't think people realize how clerks can change somebody's life by the decision they make in those hearing rooms. And the hearing room in Hingham the door's always open when you do hearings, and it's on the record. And so there's nothing secret. There's counsel in there for a person accused, even if, or they don't have to have counsel. There's a police officer usually present in the hearing rooms. But my own, I'll tell you this very quick story. I represented a fellow who was in the Air Force Academy. He had completed his first year and was home for the summer and got into a little bit of a jam, nothing overly serious involving alcohol. And we went before a clerk who gave him the benefit of the doubt. It allowed him to go back to the Air Force Academy. It allowed him to graduate from the Air Force Academy. He's flying jets for the Air Force now. If that clerk had issued that complaint, he would have been gone immediately from the Air Force Academy. So that's just one example of what decisions in the clerk's rooms can do to people's future. And I know from you, watching you, being in clerk's hearings with you, being in the courtroom with you, having many discussions with you, I know you're all about trying to make sure somebody doesn't get a record if you can help it. Sometimes you can, sometimes it's just impossible. So that to me is a great quality that you have. I remember, I think, your first day in Hingham, and since then you've been a stable and calming voice for everybody in the building at times. And I echo what other councilors have said about you. My personal experiences with you have been nothing but a pleasure to deal with you.
Likewise.
And I also want to tell you that in our court system, we usually hear about when people do something they shouldn't, or we hear about lawyers or DAs complaining about people that work in our court system, or about judges or clerks. And the fact that I go to Hingham a lot, and in Dorchester too, the fact that I have never in my entire career ever heard anybody say anything about you at all in a negative way, I think says it all to me because, as you know, our system, we gavel out and people criticize people a great deal. So whatever you've done right. But I want to thank your mother because she's the one that got you here.
Certainly did.
And without her, you probably still be in probation in Dorchester. So she did a heck of a job. I'm going to
Thank
be
you.
a pleasure to vote for you, an honor and a pleasure to vote for you next week.
Thank you,
Thank-
Councilor Jubenville.
Thank you, Counselor. Next, we'll hear from Counselor Eileen Duff.
Can you hear me now?
We sure can.
All right, terrific. It's great to see you. I, like my fellow councilors, have only heard the absolute best things about you down there. And I'm pleased to hear that because I think Councilor Juvenville mentioned when things aren't good, we hear about them. We don't always hear about the people doing good jobs. And so I want to thank you for doing that. Councilor DiPaolo also covered a lot of the issues that I would have asked you about. But there's one thing that you wrote in your application that I find interesting, and it's just more a curiosity. You wrote, I think, your theses on some criminal justice. I'm trying to find it in here.
On the juvenile justice system, Council.
Juvenile justice system, yeah, which I know Councilor DiPaolo referred to, and as he's very interested and a great advocate for. Can you share with us if you have any thoughts about what has changed from that time when you did that research and wrote to today, and anything that you see in your work that has changed as well, again, in that particular area?
Sure. During that time, as I explained to Councilor DiPaolo, the Eddie O'Brien case was front and center. So the push was to basically treat juveniles the same way that adults are treated. And I think that the system at that time was designed that very similar to the adult system. I think since then, inappropriately, juveniles are being treated differently, as they should. And in my work, I don't really deal with the juveniles that come into the court, but I also feel that adults that don't have a criminal record should be given that benefit of the doubt as well. I had a 67-year-old gentleman come before me a couple of weeks ago in a clerk's hearing for leaving the scene of property damage. Had no record. He left and then he came back and told the police that he didn't realize he hit the car, but the damage to his car was significant enough that you would think he would have known that he hit something. But based on the fact that he didn't have a record, nobody was injured. He was able to cover the restitution figure with his insurance, or it was covered by insurance. So there was no restitution ordered. He was given the benefit of the doubt. So I think it works in the adult system as well as the juvenile system. I do think that naturally juveniles should be treated differently. And I think the system has moved in that direction significantly for the better.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much. You are eminently qualified for this job. As we've seen some recent candidates, you have the experience, you have a little bit of a different background, which is very, very relevant. I personally think in these clerk magistrates and the assistant clerk magistrates, it's great when we see people who are actually attorneys, but it also is great to see people who've worked their way up through the system. And you know, even people who've practiced law and no longer practice and go back to it with different life experiences, such as you've had throughout your law enforcement career. I think it is quite valuable. So I'm very satisfied with all your answers in your application. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Counselor. Next, we'll hear from my good friend Marilyn Petito Devaney.
Thank you, Councillor Duff.
Thank you, Councillor Iannella. Nice to see you again.
Nice to see you, Councillor Devaney.
I have to tell you, this is the first time, and I've met with every nominee, 21 years, the first time that at the diner, they flick the lights like last call. So we were really thrown out. But I appreciate all the time that you gave me and to come the distance too. It was over 4 hours. I am impressed with your background, correction officer, assistant clerk magistrate, probation officer. And first, I want to go back to your journey, how you got here. Tell me about, you were interviewed by the Judicial Nominating Commission, J&C.
Correct.
For people who don't know, those are 21 lawyers are appointed to the highest calling of authority over the council. We don't have that authority. They choose who they're going to interview and who they're going to recommend to the governor for clerk, magistrate, and judges. We don't know how many apply. We just have the one person before us. So that's a big responsibility for those 21 lawyers. How many of the 21 lawyers were there at your hearing?
11.
11. So 10, and I'm not saying about you because you're well qualified. So 10 people who have had that authority didn't go to the hearing, didn't meet the nominee, didn't talk to the nominee, didn't call the nominee, and voted a lifetime position. I'm only saying that because I want the public to know, and I don't want you to be, the one that I'm addressing it to, not at all. So, okay, so you're here. First of all, I want to thank you. No contributions to anyone, the council, governor, no one, and that's wonderful. Thank you. And I want to say that your mom and dad were role models for you. There's no question. I mean, you weren't born with a silver spoon in your mouth. To think your father had 4 jobs, he had 2 full-time and 2 part-time, right?
Correct.
So, and your mom took care of the 5 boys. Well, I read somewhere that a mother of boys goes right to heaven. And I'm thinking, I don't know where I fit in that because I have 2 boys and 2 girls, so maybe I'll get a foot in. But, having said that, I think the one thing that comes through about you is your honesty. And you even said it in your, in your J&C application. But we talked about a lot of things. And even in your probation officer position, I look for compassion and empathy. And probably my colleagues are tired of me saying it, but I don't vote for anyone if they don't have those attributes, and you do. Now, we talked about different cases, even going back to probation officer. And I was impressed how you really got involved with these people and you followed up. Do you want to talk about any case that comes to mind that that you're most proud of during that period?
Sure. The case that we were speaking about was Joan.
Yes.
She was, at the time, she was approximately 39 years old. She was convicted of assault and battery with a dangerous weapon, to wit, a knife, for stabbing her domestic partner, Mark. When she came in, originally, I didn't know much about her naturally, and I came to find out that she was in fact a victim of domestic violence herself, and that she also had mental health issues and an alcohol dependency. She was, at the time I was supervising her, she was suffering from schizophrenia and PTSD as a result of the domestic violence. She was homeless. She was placed on probation and given terms to remain alcohol-free submit to mental health treatment, to take her prescribed medications, not to suffer any new arrests, and no abuse of the alleged victim in the matter. As I got to know her, she would come in once a week for the first 3 months. And oftentimes, after the first month, she would show up in my office 2 or 3 times just to talk and discuss on how her life was going. I was able to secure her a bed at Rosie's Place to temporarily address her homelessness issue, referred her to mental health counseling, and we had her attend AA meetings and attend other meetings through Rosie's Place. She became a success story because she decided that she wanted to continue her education, so I referred her to the literature program through UMass Boston, which is a collaboration of probation officers, professors over UMass Boston that gives the probationer college credit as well as essentially time off the end of their probationary period if they complete it. She took advantage of it, decided to continue with their education. She earned her degree. I think I explained to you that I left. She would come in after she was off probation, probably every few months, and check in with me and just tell me how she was doing. When I moved down to Hingham, I received a phone call. It was her, and she told me that she was doing really well, that she had her degree and she was working full-time, and she was addressing her mental health issue and her alcohol dependency. And in addition to that, she was no longer living in assisted housing. She had her own apartment. To me, she was a true success story. And I always said to her, it's through your hard work. I simply created the avenues for her to be able to succeed, but she took advantage of it. So to me, she was the one that made it happen.
Well, I'm impressed that you've helped people along the way so that they won't have a record. And that changes people's lives, you know? Just like there was the 2 young girls who went through the stop sign, and they could have had a record. And tell us what you did about that one.
So that was a case in 2018. It was a clerk's hearing. There were 4 young ladies in a vehicle coming from the beach. They went through a stop sign and struck another vehicle. There was 1 minor injury to an individual in their car. Police arrived on scene, found a cooler with one of their names written in marker on the cooler with alcohol inside. So they decided to set it up for a clerk's hearing for minor in possession of alcohol. 2 of them were in their freshman year going into their sophomore of college. The other 2 had graduated high school and were about to enter their freshman year. 2 of them were represented by counsel, 2 of them were pro se. All of them had parents come in with them. So I spoke to the police prosecutor prior to this because I felt as though this is a perfect opportunity to keep someone from having that stigma of a criminal record. Based on time, they wouldn't have been able to complete the diversion program because this was in the summer. They were leaving for school within, I think, 6 weeks of the hearing. So when I spoke to the police prosecutor, I asked that in lieu of them doing the diversion, if it would be acceptable that they do a 1-day program, Brains at Risk, which highlights the effects of distracted or driving under the influence. At that time, the prosecutor agreed. All 4 completed the program, and complaint was dismissed based on them completing the program.
How much discretion do you have as a bail magistrate. And, you know, we don't see that. I haven't seen that, you know, position, you know, maybe once before in my years. So tell us what a bail magistrate is and how much discretion does that position have?
So bail magistrate is basically somebody that would set the bail during out of court hours. So nights, holidays, weekends, if there's an arrest, police department would contact you. You would read the police report, look at the criminal record, and set a bail based on a number of factors. The factors that I use are seriousness of the offense, prior criminal record with like or similar offenses, ties to the community, employment history, whether or not they appeared for court in the past, if they do have a record, and most importantly, the safety of the general public or any alleged victim.
Going back to probation officer, tell me about that Operation Nightlight. Tell us, is it effective and how did it come about? What did you do?
I believe it is effective because you're visiting, it's random home visits to the probationer's house or workplace. They're not aware that you're coming. So there's no preparation, whereas they could come in your office and present very well. Now you're going to their home and they're unaware that you're coming. So I think it's a way to get a real look inside of what's going on. Sometimes it was helpful in kind of finding out what people need, what their needs were, being able to refer them to the appropriate services.
So you're bringing a lot of experience for the different positions you've had. And going back to correctional officer, what do you feel that experience contributes more to your ability to be a clerk magistrate?
Well, I think that I've seen people in the worst position you can be, being incarcerated. So I think that's something that I have in the back of my mind. It's a sense of hopelessness in there. So I think it's the worst place that anybody could be. I think that puts things in perspective for me when I'm making a decision.
This pandemic has changed everything and the court system's changed all our lives. I'm concerned, and I've said it here and I've talked to you about it, and you've been involved in the cases of domestic violence. And I'm very concerned in this pandemic because we really don't know what's happening in these homes. And the other thing is, if they're on Zoom, how do you really determine who's at fault? Or, you know, you have to look someone in the eye. You have to see body language, and I'm concerned about that. So how are you dealing with that?
So as far as restraining orders, we do those in person. Unless one of the parties requests that it be done via Zoom. Arraignments for new arrests are done in person. Really what we're doing now by Zoom is pretrial hearings, and then civil motor vehicle infractions and clerk magistrate hearings, as well as our civil list, so including civil cases and small claims. So if you're asking regarding restraining orders and allegations of abuse through those, they're being done in person. The option is there for the parties to come in.
As an assistant clerk magistrate, what comes to mind as the most difficult case that came before you? Someone that came before you?
I don't know if I could go to one specific case, but I'd say one that rings a bell is an older gentleman, 90 years old, driving down the street. It's a biker. Gets charged. The biker ended up, fortunately, it was a fatality. So that was one that, wasn't for a clerk's hearing. It was summons arraignment because it was a felony. But that's one that comes to mind as far as, I guess, pulling on your heartstrings. I think probably the toughest ones to deal with are domestic violence, especially when there are children involved.
With all your experience with these different positions, what changes would you like to see in the court?
One of the changes that I put for the court actually functioning better was the use of technology, which actually we were thrusted into the use of technology because of this pandemic. I guess if there's a silver lining, it's now that we are using technology more for simple things like people trying to get copies of dockets or police reports. We're able to email them to them rather than them have to make the trip to the courthouse. But that was the biggest thing, was that I thought technology was lacking, and now I think that we're really on the other side of that and using technology to our advantage.
I want to tell you that I got a wonderful call from Judge Peterson. And I want you to know this is the only time that he has ever contacted me, or I've never heard it from any other counselor. So he really respects you and is, a big cheerleader for you. And he's so happy you're here. And he wanted me to express his support for you. And so I'm doing that now.
Thank you.
But that was a great appointment, There's someone, honesty, yeah.
Yes.
So, I'm just pleased that you're here. I love your experience, in your private life, your home life, and that means a lot because I can't separate the public from the private, and you have it all. And I think it's a tribute to you that people come back to you, that you have helped through the years in all these positions that you've had. So, you've earned it the old-fashioned way. This is political. You didn't buy your way, and I'm so pleased you're here. And I'm glad. I hope that we can get some other people. Maybe we can clone you. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Councilor Devaney.
I'm the only
Thank you very much, Counselor. I don't have any questions. I want you to know that Judge Peterson called me. He obviously speaks very highly of you. I was really impressed with Judge DiLorati. It was great to see my good friend, Magistrate Eric Donovan. I have the highest regard for him. I think he's doing an outstanding job in Brighton. It was a pleasure for me to meet you at my office. We had a lengthy conversation. And again, I think you're going to be a super addition to the court. It's great to see your family here. I know how important that is to you. And when your name comes before the council next week, I'd be more than happy to support you. And I wish you the very, very best.
Thank you, Councilor Iannella.
That will conclude the hearing. And we will take up the nomination of Mr. Fullam next Wednesday. Thank you.
Thank you, councilors.